In today's latest Smart Betting Club podcast episode, I'm joined by professional punter Paul Chandler-Burns. Welcome back to the pod, Paul.
Thank you, Peter. Nice to be back live from Denmark today.
Yeah, exactly, from Denmark. You're actually aboard a cruise ship, and I was going to kick things off by asking you about how you juggle working on cruise ships with betting. I'm intrigued. Please tell me more.
So the challenge now. So I'm an entertainment manager here. Tonight I've got a Gary Barlow tribute act and I'm acting in a courtroom drama. And in between that, I've had one bet on a horse running at Hamilton trained in Newmarket. So the challenge is balancing the two. When we first came back to the ships working, the internet was not capable of managing it. But all the cruise lines have done a similar thing now where they've invested a lot in the Wi-Fi. So I can literally now, as long as we're not at sea and as long as it's not rough, I can do Betfair while I'm online and while I'm here. So it all works much better than it used to.
Well, that's the wonders of modern technology. I could only imagine, as someone who gets seasick, I can only imagine the challenges of trying to look at a Betfair screen or, a laptop while you're going up and down on the seas. So, well done if you're able to manage that. So
there's a few races where horses freeze mid-race, but you have to deal with that.
Well, that's probably just Betfair. But let's talk about you and your background, because you weren't always someone who works on cruise ships. You have an extensive background in the betting world. Talk me through that and how you all got started.
Yeah, it's all for me was I worked for the Tote going back to the early 90s now, where odds compiling and market management in the trading room at the Tote in Wigan when they went to their head office there. I worked there for several years. I remember while I worked there was always about 3 or 4% of people who made a living at it. Their bets were always watched. Their accounts were listed as hot accounts and you had to manage it. And that was my first fascination of, if they can make a living doing this, how exciting it would be to be the other side of the bookie and be in a position where you can make money out of this game. And that was the interest of the accounts that I started watching myself, thinking this is possible.
Okay, was that a matter of just seeing the type of bets they were placing or the type of bets they weren't placing? How did that then develop into you then, starting to bet yourself?
The thing was that as of then, there was no internet. So betting, the office didn't open until 9 a.m. Nobody placed any bets overnight. There was no Betfair. And at 9 a.m., especially on a busy day where Pricewise in effect had written odds, you could see what was live and what wasn't. And you started seeing a pattern. It was a time when Martin Pike, the trainer, was particularly hot. He'd have 5 horses running on the day. And we would lay a big bet on 4 of them to his owners, knowing full well if the 5th one wasn't in the Yankee, that was a non-starter that day. You'd see it lose and think that was known by the yard already, that was going to lose because that was the 5th one and none of the owners were on it because they were all on the other 4. So you started seeing patterns of yards and connections and who was live. You had people on payroll from yards who you would lay a bet to sort of stable lads beyond what you'd normally, and it gave you a marker for the burning for the business. I thought this is an angle where if you get connected to the right people, you can pretty much have an edge on what the standard 9 a.m. market prices are.
Yeah. And so did you have to be a little bit under the table in terms of how you got your bets on, obviously working and getting access to that information? Was it a matter of calling a friend and asking him to place bets for you? How did you then start to, build up your bankroll and place your own bets?
Yeah, pretty much between 9 and 9:30 was you were prime time with who your punters were. You were working non-stop. And then from 9:30, you normally had a few live ones. You would get a head lad from a yard who, if he normally bet 20 or 50 quid and he wanted 200 on a horse, you're like, okay, he's obviously been working with that one. So that was your insight. And then a lot of my betting was done, with a phone call outside the office for independent bookmakers as well, because it was less of a pattern. It's like because of the job I had, you had a bit of a known name, so you couldn't phone Hills as, at the time it was just Paul Burns. Paul Burns traded from the Tote and we all knew each other. So you had to kind of go independent as far as getting prices.
I see, yes. And because you were known. It's interesting, I was thinking about a friend of mine who turned, semi-professional, and he was told that they knew he was betting a lot because of the number of toilet breaks he would take, and extensive toilet breaks, and he sat there on his phone placing bets. He didn't last long at that particular company.
There was a time where, there was sort of 6 traders in the same room, and if we got a real live one, we had quite an agreement where, 5 of us could cover while the other one took the price available. So we had an agreement there.
I see, yeah, because you're all in it together. And someone in the trading room gets a tip for one particular horse, it would be, incumbent upon him to share that information with the rest of the guys, I'm sure.
Yes, it was the unwritten rule that if you were dealing with, particularly you're dealing with an owner or you're dealing with connections from a yard, it's like, okay, they want to back it at 14s. We'd lay it for a price and say, okay, let's between us take all the 12s we can that we can get on ourselves.
But this is obviously pre-Betfair, and so we're going back 15, 20 years now. And then at some point during as you worked there, you went professional. Is that right? What was that journey like? Obviously, going from placing bets every day and working in the trading room to then actually going professional.
First of all, I worked on the cruise ships after I left the tote. I was basically traveled around the world. My whole prospect was I wanted to do that first, and then I wanted to set myself up as a professional gambler. I'd seen it could be done at the tote. I bet and made a profit, not running it as a proper business while I was there, but I saw it could be done. So while I was working on the cruise ships, I set myself as a business target plan. I had a few contacts who I knew because I married a Cambridge girl, which makes me live in Newmarket, which became very handy. So I set off in 2003, 2004. I gave up my job and went home, had a couple of months to set myself up as a business runner, and then became full-time as a gambling professional in many different capacities of sports, betting, and horse racing.
And what was that like? What was that transition like for you? And obviously relying upon sports betting for an income and the challenges of that.
The plus part is because I'd done research and knew others, I knew that it's not a set income per month. That's the main thing. Your whole income over 12 months will probably come over a few hot months each year. And that's something you have to get used to. The hardest part was losing when it should have been a winner. You know, the horse that falls at the last fence or the jockey's blocked in. You've got a 12-1 shot and he's come second because the jockey's made an error. And they were the hardest parts to do because that felt like work that was being unrewarded. You'd found, in effect, a winner which didn't win. That was the biggest challenge.
Yes, because the profits don't come in a straight line, and like you say, those frustrations and it's whether you're going to be able to pay the bills or not can sometimes rely upon like that kind of fate. Where a horse might fall at the last, or a sportsman might miss a penalty kick, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it was a regular lifestyle of a mortgage. It was kids are in school, and your income. It's not like you didn't get commission as a salesman. You just got your basic salary that month. You actually could take a net loss one month. It has to become almost an obsession the first few years to get your business in order. And then you learn where your strengths are, where you have an edge, and start focusing. And I probably bet in less races now than I used to, but my bets were probably more intense and higher staking.
Yeah. And you mentioned to me the money management side of it was key. And I imagine it still is for anybody. Obviously, it's different times in terms of betting and getting on and restrictions and what have you. But the money management will be the same in many ways as it was 20 years ago as it is now. And how you oversaw your bankroll and how you managed how much you staked. How important was that to you and still is to you in terms of your betting?
If anybody asks about betting, I would start with, like, before you even start with your sports, start with your money management of what's your maximum bet. I tend to go 100 times the maximum bet as a bank at the start of the year. And then I work from that. And you've got to accept as well that some months you're going to take a hit. And are you financially in a position? And don't adjust stakings on hot runs and cold runs. Because if you back 4 20-1 losers, then you half your stake. And then you hit a 20-1 winner, you've only got a 10-1 winner because you've half your staking and your whole betting business is off with doing it that way. And the same way, 4 winners, 5 winners in a row, it's tempting, but don't go up staking because you're in a hot field. Like, stay with what you've got as a business plan. Run it as a business financially.
Yeah, that's good advice. It was interesting. I was listening to Patrick Veach's, I don't know if you've seen his interviews on Star Sports, which are intriguing because, he's one of these mysterious kind of gamblers that people speak about. But he did say, during a losing run, he might reduce stakes. And I did question that myself, thinking, well, you're just going to miss out when that bet that you have placed does go on to win and maybe fortune favors you.
Yeah, it's long term. I mean, again, looking at it, it's a belief as well. It's hard to have confidence in when you hit you can go 15, 20 losers in a row, and trying to explain to somebody that you're a professional gambler and your last 20 horses have lost doesn't seem to make a lot of sense logistically.
No, it doesn't at all. But obviously sticking clear, it's like if a roulette wheel lands on red 40 times in a row, what should you do next? I know there's all kinds of discussions and all kinds of quizzes and things that you can get into and mathematically, but certainly that makes sense to me. And obviously the money management being absolutely crucial. So how did you then gauge, in terms of what would be a maximum bet? What were you looking at in terms of how were you finding value on the bets that you were placing?
So for me, as far as the horses go, to focus on horses principally, I think Steve Lewis Hamilton wrote a lot of good stuff earlier. He still runs, I think it's 2 racing services he runs now, but he talks a lot about value where finding something you don't like at the front of the market and making that your percentage edge. So if you don't see a 2-1 shot winning, that's 33% of the market there at 2-1 that you think, okay, I'm not having this horse. Let's find something else against it. And that's the percentage edge I look for. So I quite like to find a horse in the front 3 in the market that I see a negative for. And then I work my own percentages from there and try and find a horse to take it on with.
I see. So you're building a traditional book. Would you do that blind, first of all, when it comes to racing, and then compare it to what the market says?
Yeah. So, when I first started, you paid odds compilers and they gave you the odds the night before. But from then on, mean, Betfair's rewritten the market rules, but I quite like to find, particularly for me, is the trainers and race planning, the race statistics. We had a winner on the service on Saturday where Clive Cox trained the winner at 17-2 with the put a 50 in it, I think it was called. And the gist of that was that Clive Cox has had 3 goes at the race. He's won it and been second. And this horse was unbeaten and was owned by the same people the year they won it. So for me, that was a really good price, 8.5-1 for a horse, which clearly there's been a conversation between trainer and connections that we'll go for that same race we won with your previous horse you owned.
Yeah, and that's something you mentioned to me. You called it like crime solving a race, and obviously using percentages and understanding about trainers and jockeys. And that presumably comes from a lifetime of experience, understanding, the different yards, the different jockeys and how races are targeted or not targeted, I presume.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the trainers, in Newmarket, the unfortunate part about Newmarket is in April, every horse is believed to be the next Derby winner. And there's a lot of lost money by stable lads in the betting shops there because the 2-year-old Morning Glory horse isn't as great as they thought when it's a 3-year-old. But in general, the good horses that are plotted up for the big races, the trainers are creatures of habit. Michael Stout has just run his top 3-year-old in the Dante, which is where I think 4 or 5 of his previous Derby winners have all gone to York, and that now goes to Epsom as the favourite.
I see. Yeah. And let's talk about living in Newmarket, because what other angles has it been able to have? You mentioned to me as well that, I don't know if it's connected, but you were killing Bet365 for some time. Was that all connected to, work living in Newmarket and the edges that was able to give you?
Yeah, Bet365 did a big advertising campaign that they would always be first with the odds. So they were literally the only firm who were up early. I think they put their odds on around 7, 8 a.m., which was before the betting shops opened at 9:30 or 10. And quite often the unraced 2-year-olds, the word gets out in Newmarket. You hear Gallop reports. I pay now for 2 Gallop reports for a month. And for sure, it's always a risk that when the first time on a race course, whether they'll reproduce it, but you certainly have an edge and you're getting 7-4 and 15-8 about a horse that's going off at 11-10 come post time. And for a while, Bet365 could be picked off for that. Their marketing campaign was "We're first with the odds." And it was great for people who knew Gallops because you could pick them off. And then they sent me a letter saying I was a non-viable client.
And how long ago was that, Paul?
We're talking 2007, 2008 kind of time that was.
Yeah, because I was going to segue to my next query, I suppose, and account restrictions and closures and how that undoubtedly impacted things. Because going back to even those times, I'm sure you could win, maybe 5-figure sums of money in across a year before bookmakers looked at your account. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think the problem now is that bookmakers have changed who they want as their clients as well. The saturation advertising of football accumulators and first goal scorer combination bets makes me laugh because it's the biggest profit margins for bookmakers, that type of market. So It came to a point where if you phoned up, say, Bet365 on a Monday afternoon, you wanted 200 at 7-1 on a horse at Lingfield. If you started getting a few winners, it then became you can do 50 at 7s. It's just moved to 9-2. And that was the biggest challenge of if you've got a pattern and you're betting well, they will certainly start shortening markets and you're not getting the prices that are on.
Yeah, I presume that was across the board with all your accounts. You started to see significant issues getting any sizable bets down, and especially enough to make a living off.
Yeah, that's the biggest difference about it. And I'd had this chat with family where it's still a mortgage-paying job. And right now that the income was affected by the price cuts, etc. William Hill would still let me have 50. They wouldn't let me have more than a 50, but they also invited me to be a pundit on the radio show. So that was a career change too.
Would there have been, working on the radio, I think that's the assumption that people make, that often those in the media get a little bit of an easier ride when it comes to accounts.
Yeah, they would lay me a 50. I couldn't bet on the day I was a pundit on their radio. And I wasn't allowed to say that I would lay this horse. I would say I could find an alternative better than it. So because that was seen as promoting Betfair. So they were the politics of the radio show. But it was nice to be paid by them for having an opinion on horse racing. So it was a nice extra income at the time, even though I could only bet 50 at a time with them.
Yes. And so then obviously that you talk about the extra income then, and diversifying income is obviously important. I speak to several gamblers these days, professional gamblers, and very often many of them have other ways to generate income because they know betting income is so volatile. What were the reasons, or what was that why you decided then to perhaps stop being professional? I presume you had a period where you kind of stopped or shifted your career a little bit. Was that behind that change?
Yeah, it was a change. Like in the industry, the idea of getting up early, getting on at a price and making a living that way changed where the prices weren't available. The amount of bets, I lost about sort of 6-7 accounts where it was the same kind of letter, but written in a different format of you are now this, or you can bet internet only, or it was all changing. It came to a reassessment. And then I was offered a decent job again, which meant a part of entertainment. I thought at the time it was a more secure income. It was a good paying job based on what I'd done previously. And I thought at the time, maybe it's time to reassess on the betting side, go back to earning a consistent income. I still had a mortgage. I've still got kids to pay. And it seemed a safer decision at the time.
Yeah, presumably betting can burn you out as well, can't it? Because it's a very intensive game and obviously it's very mentally challenging.
Oh, I've said this to my wife since as well. For the first few years, I wasn't the best person to live with because your mood can be affected by results. And I was betting on multi-sports as well. So it was Monday to Saturday horses, a little bit of horses on a Sunday. Then there was Sky Sports football. And quite often I was betting golf as well. So it was almost an obsessive drive to succeed. But at the same time, it does affect what you need to get a balance with your personal life too.
Yeah, because often many of the main sporting events are taking place when people are off, weekends or weeknights, evenings like that, where not really happening during the general 9 to 5 working week. So it doesn't often overlap with traditional family life, does it? So that certainly makes sense.
If you're up late on Sunday night because the Texas Valero Open is finishing, it's a weird one to explain to a family. I had an auntie who just basically thought I had a bad gambling problem and couldn't find work.
Well, how did family react? Obviously, you must have had a supportive wife and family background, but my experience is similar to yours. There's always those people in the family who I still think she's no longer with us now, my grandma still thinks I was a bookmaker. No matter how many times I told her I wasn't.
I mean, my wife knew the early plan when I worked with her. I said to her, we'd started dating, and I said that my plan was to gamble professionally. And I showed her the accounts and showed her how my bank ran. I said, my football bets, pretty much, they're all ante-post in August. So we lose thousands out the joint bank account every August. And then we hope by May it all comes back in. But I explain how that works. My wife's side of the family, there's quite a lot of Sri Lankan in the family. And their idea of betting on horses of which one would win is a very dangerous way of living. And it was just the one auntie who would always hold my hand and go, one day you'll get a job break and somebody will employ you. It's like, can you explain to her that it's not that?
Yeah, it's always tricky, isn't it? Absolutely. So let's fast forward then to modern day betting, because it's good to talk about what happened in your journey. But obviously for those people in the present, we want to know what you're betting on these days. Is it mainly online in terms of exchanges, or is it in shops? How are you getting your bets on?
My betting now, first of all, a huge free commercial here for MacBet bookmakers who bet via WhatsApp. So when you're at sea, that's a huge plus that you can literally just WhatsApp them a message and they'll take the bet, confirm it, and send me a message back. So they've been a godsend for me. And a lot of independents now, it's great to see that a lot of their advertising is, we won't cut you, or we'll lay you a price at a certain amount. And talking firms like Wilson Bet, Gem Racing, these are firms who have been good to me for laying a decent sized bet. And it might not be the top price you expect, but you can get a price and you can get a decent stake on with them. So on the horses side, I would think the majority of mine now is either independents or Betfair.
Yeah, but no, it's great to hear that about the independents. I had another tipster on recently, another professional, Quentin Franks, and he talked, I'm not sure if he referenced MacBet, but I think he's certainly put them forward to me, and they're someone I've explored. And yes, it's encouraging to see their growth in that area, I suppose. I think there's a Goodwin Racing is another one. I think there's a few others. You might not get enhanced place terms or best odds guaranteed necessarily, but you're actually going to get laid a bet and also get paid out, which is another problem these days. And how often are you betting? How does it fit into your lifestyle now? Is it just a little bit of extra income, or is it a little bit more than that?
A couple of standard bets through the week, and then on a principal meeting, it becomes a big part for me where I'm up at 5 a.m., say on a Saturday, and by 8, 9 a.m., I finalize what I'm going to back. Again, it's hard sometimes to gauge prices because the Pricewise column now is such a guide rather than actual market price. So Betfair's a better guide as to what odds you're going to get. The principal meetings, I still play probably about half to what I used to when I was betting full time. And through the week, I'd say probably 2 or 3 bets a week on the regular racing, particularly if I get something strong out of Newmarket, because I've got 3 or 4 guys who basically eat, live and breathe racing there. And if they send me something strong, I wouldn't want to miss it just for the sake that I have an event that I'm working on that day.
Yeah, and the convenience, obviously, being able to do it all through your phone, even if you're out at sea, and to place a WhatsApp message and get a bet on very, very quickly must no doubt help with that. So is it mainly just racing that you're betting on these days? Because you mentioned ante-post football, and I know you did a whole bunch on special events and golf. How does it break down in terms of sports and markets?
For me now, so my football betting would be in August. Pretty much most of my football betting for the year is all done in August, and that's all just settled up, including a nice one for Wigan, who won League One this year, which I'd backed them at 14-1 to win the league. There were 16s on, with 9 games to go, and it went down to the last day. So that was an interesting emotional roller coaster. But we got there in the end. I've got Liverpool to win the Champions League. I backed them and Manchester City. So I thought I had both teams in the final at one stage, but that's riding on a maybe kind of right now. Golf, I just back the majors and the Ryder Cup now because I think there's so many great concessions. I mean, it's industry knowledge that on the Masters, bookies tend to take a loss because they know that they can hook you in for the year with first 10 places and all the kinds of specials that they rope in new clients who then think golf's easy, let's make a living at it. And golf's probably one of the most unpredictable betting mediums to go. Even though profitable, it can be great. And then my other strange angle that I bet on is the reality TV. Probably having an edge because of the industry I work in and knowing some of the, shall we say, non-ethical practices that determine TV talent show winners.
Yeah, let's talk about that because we've got the X Factor, was it Dancing on Ice, all these kind of elements. And I do wonder, because obviously they're pre-recorded and obviously there's a whole bunch of people working on these shows. Does word then filter out and say, well, these guys are getting kicked out this week? Or
So the thing with that is, and bookmakers will honestly say this, is it's the only event they don't have a betting edge. They're on exactly the same page as the punter where your research comes through internet. And I think I wrote something for you many years ago when Alexandra Burke would win Pop Idol or X Factor, as it was at the time, X Factor, where she walked in and they apparently recognized her from a couple of years ago where she'd tried out but didn't get through. That's because she'd been managed by the company who ran the show for the 2 years. So that was fairly assured.
I see. So, yeah, it was a bit of an open goal for her. Yes. Inside information certainly can help on that. But I assume bookmakers are very wary of such markets, especially if a chunk of cash comes in from somebody on a particular event or a particular...
Perhaps
yeah, I mean, they generally, most sort of Dancing on Ice, Strictly's, etc., when the market comes up, there's a 3-4 to 1 bracket where the first few are in the market. And literally, it's bookies testing the water. And then if you know their careers, if you know their career skill set, like Ray Quinn, when he won Dancing on Ice, was a complete different level of skater. And I got a decent amount on at threes, and I think he was 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 after the first episode. And then ITV kept reporting that he might be injured, and that was only because he was so far ahead of the other skaters that they had to make the series more interesting.
I see. It's not a show I watch. I must be honest with you. I don't watch much reality TV, but I'm aware of the edges that can no doubt come about. So that's fascinating. And you mentioned ante-post football. Is that all you do now in terms of the football side of it? You place a whole bunch of bets back in August. Talk me through that and how you actually start to find your edge in those markets.
Yeah, so come the end of the season, it's interesting to watch teams. I mean, one of the biggest differences now is that the teams going down from Premier League going into the Championship, the parachute payment thing is such a financial difference. And pretty much most years, 1, maybe 2 of the teams are coming straight back up. So that's an angled market. And for example, the Wigan bet this year, I had that bet where Wigan had financial investment. And at that level in League One, it's quite significant at the start of the season. So I backed Wigan and Ipswich as Ipswich being local to me down in Suffolk where I live. They were supposed to get their squad together this year, but they finished 8th or 9th and Wigan won the league. An interesting team to watch next year for me will be in League Two, Bradford, who are a sleeping giant. They've got Mark Hughes managing them now, and they had a bit of a strong end to the season. So straight away, I'd keep an eye on that. And that difference of money in the clubs at the lower levels and who's got the loan markets now. If you can get some good loan players or a deal with a club. I mean, Derby County a few years ago had Lampard, who was basically using the Chelsea kids. And that's kind of the angle I'm looking for on the football side now.
Yes, I've heard that about Lampard. As an Everton fan, I've heard about Lampard, who basically had Mason Mount and a couple of others, and who wouldn't succeed at that level with such players. That's interesting because I'm aware of a few other professional guys who bet extensively on ante-post football, although, yes, it's a matter of tying your money up for 9-10 months of the year. And also these days, will that bookmaker still be solvent come May the following year and be able to pay that out?
Yeah, I'd be careful taking a big price on a small one-shop independent. Yeah, it's like let's have a firm that's got a head office.
Yeah, potentially if they do go to the wall, they'll get bought out by one of their rivals. But let's also talk about, you've referenced Pricewise a couple of times in this conversation already, and that's an angle that you've followed for many a year. Talk me through, you run a service, we should say, for SBC, one of our free tipsters. It's called Pricewise with PCB, with yourself. And you, quite rightly and understandably, been following Tom Segal for a long period of time because it's been quite profitable for you. Now, it's changed over time because of the nature of the markets. But just give me an introduction into why you follow Tom and the profits he's been able to make for you.
I mean, before Tom, it was Mark Cotton for Pricewise. He invented the whole Pricewise concept of odds in a line and bets based on a value pick of the day. And one of the best books I ever read was 100 Hints for Better Betting, written by Mark Cotton. And it's about looking at a market and making value. So that was the first angle for me. And he was in that bracket when I worked for the tote of a punter who regularly made it pay. So I've always followed Pricewise, not necessarily always as good as the people who run it, but Tom Segal, definitely one of the best. His end of year profits have been fantastic for the last sort of 4 or 5 years, but it can be a point where using him, you can go 30 to 40 losers and then a 50 to 1 winner. Now, who's got the sort of mental fortitude to handle that kind of betting, I think it's a strong call. But for me, having a full-time job, I want, in effect, somebody who's the best in the business to do the first part of the work for me. So I consider his column and his article phase one of my betting. So when I log on online for the Racing Post or using Press Reader to get a digital paper, the first part of my job is done, the work's done. I look at Tom Segal, I look at the Racing Post ratings, which is in effect a free handicapper that's part of the newspaper. And then from there, that would shape my betting on what are the principal race meetings.
Yeah, so it's a similar concept to many SBC subscribers in following good tipsters because they have full-time jobs or they have other commitments and they're relying on others to give them a guide. Now, I know you've spoken with Tom and had conversations with him about his strategy. And one of the things that comes across is he writes a column for the Racing Post and he has to put a bet forward. But yet by filtering through and reading potentially between the lines of where there's value, and other filters we'll probably speak about, you're able to kind of find and pick and choose a little bit more about when you actually should be having a bet and when he's putting something up because, well, he has to.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for the Cheltenhams and the Royal Ascots, every race is priced up and you'll find value because these are all horses that you're familiar with for the season. You've probably marked them down. You've seen their performances and thought, I'll check that one out for the Supreme Novices Hurdle. He seems that tight. On an average day, let's say there's a Sandown and Musselburgh card, his advisory is to find 3 or 4 bets on a Saturday, which is not always possible. And the other angle that he now writes, they had a success a few years ago doing a Cheltenham ante-post feature. It was a Cheltenham Gold Cup and Cheltenham Champion Hurdle feature. And I think now the Racing Post does about a 12-week countdown to Cheltenham. And he has to put an ante-post bet up for each of the key elements. And I think they had 1 out of 16 winners at the ante-post angle of it. But it sells a lot of issues that if Tuesday is the Ryanair Chase special Cheltenham ante-post feature, that will sell more than an average Racing Post. So he's almost forced into putting up bets long range now for Cheltenham. And I think Royal Ascot as well, they're doing more of that now, purely on newspaper sales rather than racing results.
Yes. So it's a matter of going through that. And one of the other criticisms is I've seen people talk about is that bookmakers tell Tom what races to focus on. But that's part of the nature of his column because he's often, writing about the feature handicap and putting tips up and all the races which are going to attract the most money or where ITV racing are.
Yeah, it's a TV goal that, the revenue which goes into a race, we saw this when we worked in it, if the race is on mainstream television and a significant tipster has put up a tip for it, the revenue will double just on the fact that we all know because this guy's written about it and we can watch it live. And the difference in money on that, it shouldn't be that impactful, but that's how the general punter sees it. If this is the big race of the day, we'll have a go at it. Things like the Wokingham have massive turnovers and it's a 30-runner handicap, but everybody has a shot at it because it's generally 8-10 to on the field and probably Tom Segal's put 2 up for it. So races like that will be featured in the Post, will be a mainstream television feature that day and will do massive income. And if the bookies can get a result at a 25, 33 to 1 winner, they're happy to lay.
Yes. So let's talk about some of the filters as well that you apply to finding not just backing everything that Tom puts up. And one area you're looking at is the front end of the market, probably through a variety of reasons. No doubt the fact that the greater chance of winning, but also price movement isn't quite as tricky. Talk me through some of those filters such as that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier again about that criminal profiling. So going back to that side of things, every punter should be aware that 70% of races are won by a horse in the front 3 in the market. So that's your suspects straight away as to who's going to win this race. So the front 3 in the market, again, if it moves from 7 to 2 to 100 to 30 to 3s, it's not as big a difference as a 25 to 1 shot and taking 12s. You're taking half the odds, which is a huge difference numerically. So I would always, whatever race I consider, I would particularly look at the front 3 and see if there are race profile fits. And then also add in that with Tom Segal and any significant write-ups that you get in the paper. So quite often I'm working with a short list of 5 or 6 horses in a race. If Tom Segal's outsider is written up in a small end of a column, that would probably be the first one off my list rather than on it.
I see. Yeah. So it's just a matter of, it almost smooths the ride out because you're also backing a mix of win only and each way place value as well. So you talked earlier about would you back if he has a 50-1 winner, but he might have 30 to 40 losers prior to that. Oh, it's quite a rocky ride, isn't it? But your approach again is to look to smooth that out by also taking the front end of the market, but how you stake and the type of bets you place.
Yeah, I mean, for the service that I'm currently writing for you now, since we didn't do it over last summer where the internet wasn't sufficient on the ships, and we had a break and we came back in November. We're now 6 winning months out of 7. And there's 1 month where Tom Segal massively outperformed me. But there's also been times where he's dropped 30 or 40 points and I've been 6-7 points up. And that's a 30-40 point swing just for the sake of, I think for morale and for mentality, it's important for punters to have a consistency of returns. And if that involves a 2-1 winner or a 7-2, then it's worth taking it rather than to try to find the glory of a 25-1. And I think it's very hard to keep going. If you don't hit one in your first 25, can you do another 25 or are you mentally strong enough for that?
Yeah, that's important. And that goes to the heart of betting for many people, isn't it? That ability to cope with the losing runs that will always impact everybody, no matter how good you are. You listen to yourself, you listen to, like I mentioned, Patrick Beach before, Harry Finlay, all these people do have bad losing runs, and it's how you cope. And if you can get to the other side of that when the winners kick in again with your bank still intact and your sanity still intact.
Sanity the key there.
It is the key because it's just a testing thing, and the mentality almost is what separates the winners from the losers long term. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a friend of mine who he knows I was into the racing and he was going to Newmarket, and this is a prime example of why it's a failing betting aspect for most. He said, "What have you got for Friday night?" He was going racing. I gave him 3 horses. The first one came second, the middle one came nowhere, and the last one won at 7-1. And he messaged me, he goes, "Well, they were no good." I said, "Well, you must have made a profit." He said, "Well, the first 2 didn't win, so I left the third one." And that's the essence of gambling is right there. It should have been 3 £10 wins, should have returned 80, and he's had a good day, but he made a decision that he didn't like the first 2, so he left the third one. And if you're asking for information, you've got to split your money over the 3 rather than pick the 2 you like best.
That's right. And it's avoiding that, I think it's called hot hand fallacy, where people assume that because your last 5 bets have won, your 6th one's more likely to win. Or on the flip side, if your last 5 bets have lost. I
still get messages every year from all family members that Paul works in horse racing, so we'll message him to see who's going to win the Grand National. And it's like, that's way beyond.
Yes, I can feel that pain. I get those kind of messages all the time, especially during Cheltenham. I have a family member who consistently does exactly what you says. I said, "Oh, you must have had a good day today." Well, the first 2 lost, so I didn't take the 3rd and 4th ones. That went on to win.
That's basically, again, every tipster runs the same way there. I mean, Henry Ricks, who was a legendary tipster, who went for so long, I think there was 6 or 7 losing months at one point, and then took a full-page ad out in the Racing Post where he did the 66-1 winner, and it was massive. That's 13,000 at £200 win stakes for a month. And it's like, how many people joined up on that membership before they checked what the previous 6 months did?
Yes, lies, damn lies, and statistics, whatever the phrase is. But yeah, I mean, there is a tipster that comes to mind who used to say, "Oh, my last 11 bets, the last 10 have won." I'm like, "Well, why are you picking 11? What's the significance of 11? Or my last 2.5 months. Well, what about 4 months? What about 5 months?" Yeah, so you always have to be careful around those stats.
Any tipster, I would ask, could I have your last 12 months with your ROI? Is the first question I'd ask anybody. There was a well-known tipping line who their advertisement was, "We gave you a maximum bet yesterday and it was another return to the payout counter." And that was because it was 7-4 and it came 3rd. So it's each way. So you got a bit of your money back. It was a losing bet, but it was a return to the counter because you got some of your money back.
Yes, I think I know the service you're referencing there. Yeah, but that's one of the tactics that you have to be aware of, certainly in this industry. And that's important to talk about. And we laugh about it. But certainly sometimes it's not quite as obvious as that. But on social media and other areas, people sometimes have the wool pulled over their eyes through marketing tactics and the certain phrasing of bets.
Legit is the service analysis that if you're trying to do a marketing spin, I think your magazine is the nemesis of them and you'll destroy it. And I've seen articles you've written on services who need to be more open and need to be more honest about their results because, like they said, they'll phrase that between March and July last year, we made 174 points. And you pick those months because...
Yeah, and it's a really good point. And it's something for people to be aware of, to get under the bonnet and see not just the headlines, not just the winners. I had a service approach me for proofing earlier this week and they only listed their winners on site. And I was like, well, that's no use to me. I need to see all the bets that you've placed over the whole period that you've been in operation. Because if you're just telling me the 10 winners or the 50 winners that you've had on their prices, that's absolutely nonsense to me. And it makes, I won't be getting involved in exploring such a service. And I would advise people not to, and to always look for full results. And you can see the pattern of performance. And so even sometimes when you see, we're going a little bit off tangent, when you do see a performance, a strong performance, also be wary about those services whereby they've had perhaps one or two really big winners, which massively skew results. Because I've seen some football services which had some really big doubles that come in and it made their ROI over 10%. But if you looked at their performance over a period of years, it was only made a profit because of that one result.
Yeah, and it's strike rates are a key, I think, as well. Coming back to the mentality of it, you can't make a 12-month living on betting with one hit in June that was the big price winner, because that's a very difficult way to be living, where you're ticking over for 11 months and you're all relying on the one return. And I think there's similar racing services where they might land one at the Cheltenham Festival that's 50s or Royal Ascot, and that will become their marketing tool for the year. If we were the only firm who gave this winner, and you also gave a lot of losers too.
Exactly. So you have to be very careful, especially I think in the social media aspect of it. It used to be more some of the premium phone lines where people could put a waffle for 5 minutes and mention 8 horses and then quote, I gave you this tip.
Living in mid-market, I know a lot of the guys who run those.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. That's probably a whole conversation for another podcast, isn't it? About talking about some of those kind of tactics and those people. But it's certainly something to be aware of, especially on social media. And you mentioned there about having that transparency and having the results. And I think they've got the figures for what you've been doing over the past 12 months. Well, it's a 12-month period. Like, we took a break over the summer because of the reasons you mentioned, but we're at 12.5% ROI from 321 bets. And the key of that is you're not quoting prices which aren't obtainable. These are prices on the day of racing, later towards the actual race event actually itself, in liquid markets for big races. So generally, you're going to get your bets accepted and matched on those horses.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier on a Saturday to get close to, at least. I said the winner we had the other day, I got some of it on at 9-1. It won. I got majority of bets 17-2, so we've used that as a price. And then the Andrew Balding stayer over 2 miles, which we said 9-2 was a general price with 6 to 8 firms when the bet was laid. So we've gone with that as a price. That's easier on a Saturday because there's all the firms are trading. I said it becomes difficult on a Lingfield Monday if you're trying to get a price, because you probably get a quarter of a decent stake on it because they'll move fast because there's not the same volume in the market.
Yeah. And of course, there's the exchange is a viable option again, because these are liquid market. It's not a matter of taking a price with Betfair because they're paying out the first 5 when everyone else is doing the first 3 and taking advantage of the enhanced place terms. It's often a matter of, well, you can go into the win or the place market on Betfair and replicate these bets if you don't have accounts. And obviously shops are definitely an option too. So moving forward, Paul, the plans are obviously continue to do the Pricewise with PCB service, and those people are interested, they can access not just the service, but also you did some articles for SBC on the strategy that underpins how you select your tips.
Yeah, I mean, that's on your website now of how it all started. And like I said, for me, it's phase 1 is the Racing Post and Tom Segal. And then each Saturday and principal race meetings, the message goes up. Early morning, would put Tom Segal's bets up if you just want to back blind. And then I'll come back normally an hour later with what I've filtered and what decisions I've made. And we've got Epsom just around the corner. So looking forward to that with the 2-day card with the Oaks and the Derby. On that very subject as well, we've got Desert Crown, not an official account bet, but we gave it a nice write-up, an article before the Dante. And then in the Oaks, it's a very short price John Gosden favourite, which, interestingly enough, has not run in any of the prep races that his previous Oaks winners have run in. So I'm interested to see that angle.
Yeah, you mentioned Desert Crown as well. And if you talk about doubles that you can have on both on horses to win on the day and a future classic, because that's, you didn't put it up as a bet, but you put it up as a suggestion. And probably people aren't aware of it. It's a bet that you can often request through calling through to a shop.
Yeah, so the object here is, for example, it's considered an affected double. So if a horse is 2-1 on the day and 10-1 to win the Derby, for example, if you had that as just as a straight double, it pays around 33-1. So you'll probably get about 14 or 16-1. It's called a combined price double. And it's the horse to win that race on the day and to win the future event. Now, you won't find it on the websites, but if you go into a shop or if you phone a main office, somebody in the trading room will give you a price on that. And it's roughly, if it was 2 separate events, you can pretty much half it. And that's about the price you'll get. So on the day, Desert Crown, we mentioned that horse for the Dante was literally only just fully fit. And the yard were quite happy for it to get beat that day, but was their main Derby horse. And it's won by 3.5 lengths. So on that day, I think it won at about 5-2. It was 6s or 7s for the Derby. So you'd get about sort of 10s or 12s that day for a combined price. And we actually did something similar on the account before Christmas. We had Galopin de Champs, who we backed on the day and then to win its chase at Cheltenham, which was the greatest bet we'd had until it fell at the last fence. But on Pricewise, again, it was another way of just boosting an odds and a little bit of an angle where you can get a bit of a percentage squeeze on a race.
It's good to know because, in today's betting world and betting markets, these little angles whereby, type of information there that you wouldn't necessarily be aware of until someone tells you. Certainly wasn't aware that you could request these doubles. But yeah, pick up the phone, call head office or go into a shop.
On the independent, so you're generally dealing with a smaller company, they'll know about it, so they'll know how that works. Whereas if you're phoning a big chain, if you're calling William Hill head office or if you're calling Corals, you're generally getting a telephonist first. And then while you're speaking to that telephonist, you're speaking to them, they won't know what a combined odds double is. And if you just ask for one of the traders to give you a price, and they'll know exactly what you mean. The traders will take 2 minutes to come up with a price, whereas the telephonist likewise probably won't be familiar with it.
Oh, that's anyone that's had any engagement with customer service at one of the big bookmakers will be able to definitely relate to that, no doubt. I will let you get on though, Paul, because I know you've got events to attend to this evening. And thank you for taking the time out on board a cruise ship. The first time I recorded a podcast with somebody out at sea. And I really appreciate you giving me the time to explain about your strategy, your background, and also Pricewise with PCB. How can people find out more, Paul? Are you on any social media at all?
So again, mainly through yourselves. It's all logged on for free, and it's the instant group. I think there's almost a couple of hundred members on there now. So if you log on to that, and then through that they can speak to me. Last cruise, actually, a guest approached me and said, "You had a win double today." He said, "I'm on the SBC website with you," and I never knew the guy, but he was in the audience of the show I was hosting. So we had a racing chat after that.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, brilliant. That's great to know. Yes, a small world. Perhaps they saw your name and said, "I'm going to book that cruise."
It's a combined marketing flow now.
There you go. Anybody that wants to meet Paul, you just need to search for him and find out what cruise ship he's going to be on. But no, thank you again, Paul. Thank you ever so much. Yes, and people can learn more about the service of the Smart Betting Club. We've got a bunch of information, one of the free tipsters there. And yeah, there's like I say, you mentioned the Telegram group that we've got where bets get put forward. And it's a really good angle. It's something that available as a benefit of being a Smart Betting Club member. And you can see all the results. We can also keep a free spreadsheet logging all of the results at the settled prices. So thank you again, Paul. Wish you all the best for your evening and your entertainment that you're overseeing on board your cruise ship. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks for now, Peter. Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.